Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and once again, welcome to yet another event of our ambassadors' lecture series. Today, we have a very distinguished guest amidst us, Ambassador Andrey Tatarinov from of the Russian Federation. You all have his bio notes before you, but very briefly, he joined the Foreign Ministry in 1973, has held key positions in the ministry at home and abroad. He was ambassador in Vietnam between 2001 to 4, New Zealand 2008 to 12. He's been a special MFA envoy to ASEAN and the Asia Pacific region states 2004 to 2007. He was also director of the 3rd Asia Pacific Regional Department between 2012 and 15. And since April 2012, he has been ambassador to Singapore. I gather from colleagues that he has been extremely active in the Singapore diplomatic scene. Of course, his country is one that is very close to South Asian hearts, shall we say. At a personal level, I'm beholden to many colleagues from Russia with whom I have worked, which includes a person who I consider one of the finest foreign ministers today, Sergei Lavrov. And his country has also been instrumental in the nascence of my own, which is Bangladesh. And those days in their different avatar, the Soviet Union was extremely supportive of Bangladesh in our initial years. At a global level, just a few remarks. Russia is beyond any shadow of doubt today an Asian power. Historically, Moscow has looked to East as much as it has looked to the West. As Asia rises to fill the space vacated by the perceived decline of the West, Russia's Asian role acquires additional importance. It is having to react to China, of course, which is increasingly assertive, a restless Korean peninsula, and unpredictable changes in the American policy and the burgeoning importance of South Asia and the ASEAN. Now, Russian policymakers are, of course, acutely aware of these challenges, and we will soon listen to how they are planning to tackle them. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Ambassador. You have the floor for about 30 minutes, and thereafter we'll have a Q&A session. Andres?
Thank you very much.
You might need to speak to the microphone.
Yes. Yeah. Well, put it closer.
Yeah.
So, dear Dr. Chowdhury, Your Excellency, Ambassador of Pakistan, dear friends, it is an honor and privilege to speak to you today. This is the first time I come to the ISAS. I hope not the last time. I will be pleased to come again after a while to brief you about changes which are going on constantly. Today I want to touch upon the major aspects of Russia's policy in the East, in the Asia Pacific, and in the Southeast Asia in particular. The geopolitical shift of power to Asia has become a reality in recent years and is expected to be even more substantial in the years to come. This region steps up as an influential player of the emerging polycentric world and locomotive of progress with the energy for further growth despite the current turbulence of global economy. It is an attractive space for international cooperation, a cross point of interests of large stakeholders and major multilateral institutions. It is therefore natural that Asia is one of the key vectors of the foreign policy of the Russian Federation, which is an integral and organic part of the region. In fact, as it was mentioned by Iftekhar, the Russian Federation could be fairly referred to as more Asian than European, because circa 60% of our territory stretched to the east of the Urals Mountains. Historically, Russia has been inseparably connected with many countries of this region. Our support was one of the main factors which contributed to the victory of national liberation movements in Asia. The people of China, India, Indonesia, Mongolia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and other countries remember this very well. I can add Thailand, then Siam, which stayed independent in the end of the 19th century, mostly because of support from the Russian Empire at the time. We consistently intensify our efforts to deepen engagement in political and economic cooperation and integration in Asia. It is a long-term policy carried out in a persistent and systemic manner, no matter how we manage our relations with the West. The allegations that Russia's proactive Eastern track policy is caused by the present complications in our dialogue with the United States or European Union are obviously short-sighted and do not reflect the reality. Greater involvement in the regional affairs is a matter of principle for us, which is not guided by any momentary considerations we may have. It serves long-term interests of Russia and is consistent with the global development trends. Our policy in Asia is deliberate and focused, aimed at truly stable balance of power and the liberation of cohesive regional agenda. The clear commitment of Russia is to ensure stability, security, and prosperity in Asia, to develop relations with the regional partners, both in bilateral and multilateral formats. These objectives are distinctly indicated in the new foreign policy concept of the Russian Federation, approved by President Putin last November. By the way, Singapore is singled out in this document as our important partner in the Asia-Pacific. Russia enjoys time-tested friendship and multifaceted cooperation with many regional countries. Our relations with China, India, and Vietnam have been upgraded to strategic partnership in recent years. The relations with the ASEAN states, Japan, and South Korea are continuously developing on a strong and mutually beneficial basis. Russia is a prominent player in the regional multilateral and trans-regional fora, such as East Asian Summit, ASEAN Regional Forum, ASEAN Defense Minister Meeting Plus, Conference on Interaction and Confidence Building Measures in Asia, Asia Cooperation Dialogue, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, and some others. The focus of our foreign policy on Asia is reflected by Russia's membership in the Asian group of ASEM. The development of productive interaction between these structures is an essential part of the long-term task to shape a strong regional and international system of relations. It is in our common interests to further expand multi-tiered network diplomacy and build the architecture of multilateral partnerships in the region. The logic of Russia's foreign policy in the Asia-Pacific proceeds from the fact that there is a strong need to establish an advanced environment of international relations in the region, which will offer broad opportunities for the promotion of multilateral trade and investment cooperation, uplift our joint efforts to counter existing multidimensional security challenges, and prevent the emergence of new threats, serve as a launchpad to build an integrated Asian political and economic space. Asia needs a system which would ensure equitable cooperation, genuine balance of power, and harmony of interests. Every Asian country, large and small, must have a say in drafting regional agenda. We advocate non-discriminatory regional order without imposition of unilateral approaches, with no division into leaders and supporters. The communication between the states is to be based exclusively on trust and mutual respect. In September 2010, Russia and China came forward with a joint initiative to strengthen security in the Asia-Pacific, urging the nations of the region to respect sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity, not to interfere in the internal affairs of each other, to reaffirm the commitment to the principle of equal and indivisible security, as well as the defensive nature of the military policies, not to use or threaten to use military force, not to take or support any actions aimed at overthrowing governments or undermining the stability of other states, to settle differences by peaceful political and diplomatic means based on the principles of common understanding and readiness to seek compromise, to strengthen cooperation in counteracting unconventional security threats, to develop bilateral and multilateral cooperation in the military sphere, not directed against third countries, to develop cross-border cooperation and people-to-people contacts. Guided by the principles formulated in this initiative, Russia, China, and Brunei proposed to create a new security and cooperation architecture for the Asia-Pacific. This proposal was supported at the 8th East Asia Summit in Bandar Seri Begawan in October 2013. Until today, the EAS members held 6 rounds of consultations in Bandar Seri Begawan, Moscow, Jakarta, Phnom Penh, Beijing, and Bangkok to work out mutually acceptable arrangements on the rules of the game in the region. It has been agreed recently that from now on, the relevant EAS discussions will be conducted on a regular basis in Jakarta between the permanent representatives of the EAS countries to the ASEAN Secretariat and representatives from the headquarters. Russia has no hidden agenda in the region. We do not forge covert military alliances that would threaten anyone's security. On the contrary, we look forward to intensifying diversified political and economic cooperation with all countries that show such willingness. Cooperation to ensure peace, stability, and common prosperity is the key principle of our efforts in Asia. Our country monitors the efforts to establish a system of free trade agreements in the Asia-Pacific, including the TPP and the Comprehensive Economic Partnership for East Asia. These FTAs should fall under the WTO principles and be as open as possible for all, We think it's counterproductive to develop free trade zones if they ignore the interests of other countries, especially regional neighbors. This is the approach which Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan, as member states of the Eurasian Economic Union, a market of 180 million people with total GDP of 4.2 trillion US dollars, are committed to. We hope that this establishment will forge a link between Europe and the Asia-Pacific. Last year, Russia, or to be precise, the Eurasian Economic Union, launched FTA between the EU and Vietnam. A similar arrangement is being negotiated with Singapore. The first round of talks was held here in August. And unlike the TPP, which has a small circle of founding members, while the rest can join but will have to follow the rules written without their participation, we are looking to create broader and more democratic economy-based partnership involving the countries of the Eurasian Economic Union, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and ASEAN countries with no restrictions on admission. It is an idea by President Putin to create a so-called Greater Eurasian Cooperation or Partnership, which will link together countries of ASEAN, Eurasian Economic Union, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and maybe the European Union in the future. The open nature of this initiative will ensure efficiency and meet the interests of all participating countries. Our proposal to move towards such free trade deal based on equality and mutual consideration of interests was supported by the leaders of the Southeast Asia states at the third Russia-ASEAN Summit in Sochi, held on May 19 and 20 last year, in commemoration of the 20th anniversary of dialogue partnership between Russia and ASEAN. This important meeting opened up the way to bring our cooperation to the level of strategic partnership. Such decision couldn't have been better timed. Since July 1996, when Russia became a full dialogue partner of ASEAN, their relations have matured and reached new heights. In 2004, Russia joined the Treaty on Amity and Cooperation in the Southeast Asia. 3 years later, we established Russia-ASEAN Dialogue Partnership Financial Fund to support joint projects, and today its budget amounts to $5 million US. In 2009, the position of the Russian permanent representative to ASEAN was instituted. And recently, just a couple of weeks ago, we appointed a separate ambassador to ASEAN based in Jakarta, who arrived there on the 17th of September. We enjoy close partnership with ASEAN and have a precise strategic partnership agenda fixed in the political declaration and comprehensive plan of actions to promote cooperation for 2016-2020, adopted at the Sochi summit. Both sides are actively working on the implementation of these documents designed to promote high-level political dialogue, cooperation in trade, investment, transport, energy, agriculture, emergency response, research, technology, education, tourism, and culture fields. The latest development is the adoption of Russia-ASEAN statement on joint efforts to counter international terrorism, endorsed by the foreign minister at their August meeting in Manila. we are actively progressing towards the establishment of the network of Russia-ASEAN think tanks to serve as a Track 1.5 mechanism where our country will be represented by Moscow State University of International Relations and Singapore by the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, ISAS-NUS Institute, which is your neighbor. Another top priority for Russia is to strengthen relations with China, our closest neighbor. It is hard to underestimate the importance of bilateral ties that have grown into comprehensive partnership and strategic collaboration, focused on ensuring international and regional security stability, creating a global governance architecture addressing the imperatives of our time. The relations between Moscow and Beijing have never been better than today. In fact, we think they can serve as a model of state-to-state cooperation in the 21st century. We do not turn a blind eye to various issues where consensus has yet to be reached, but discuss them in the spirit of frankness and openness to come up with mutually acceptable and beneficial agreements. Close foreign policy coordination is a major part of Russia-China strategic partnership, and it is not spearheaded against any other country. Our approaches to majority of current global and regional issues either coincide or are very close. We firmly stand for the rules-based order governed by international law, oppose diktat and blackmail, unilateral sanctions, double standards, and attempts to interfere in the home affairs of sovereign states. China is a key Russian economic partner with more than $40 billion in trade last year. We set a clear target to expand it to $200 billion in the next 5 to 7 years. And this figure is not too high, even in the current economic environment. It remains relevant in our agenda and can be achieved. We have reached a basic agreement to consolidate Eurasian integration in the Eurasian Economic Union format and China's Silk Road Economic Belt project. The Eurasian Economic Commission is working on trade and economic cooperation agreement and roadmap for priority integration projects between EAEU and China. And in this regard, I want to mention that President Putin attended the Belt and Road Summit held in Beijing last May. Energy cooperation is a very important part of our partnership with China. We have major oil and gas project and moving towards strategic energy alliance aimed at promoting global energy security. Military cooperation between Russia and China is highly diverse and has improved significantly over the last years. In this context, I wish to mention that our approach to the South China Sea has not changed. We stand on the position that the states involved in the territorial disputes should honor the principle of the non-use of force and continue to search for a diplomatic settlement based on the international law in the spirit of the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. We consistently support the efforts of ASEAN and China to draft a code of conduct with legally binding guidelines for the activities in the disputed waters. Russia is not involved in the territorial disputes in the South China Sea and has no intention of getting involved. It is a matter of principle for us not to side with any party. We believe that the countries concerned, directly involved in these territorial claims, should conduct talks in a format they define themselves. Any external party interference is counterproductive and raises tensions in the South China Sea. In recent years, we have been reinvigorating our cooperation with Japan. Since 2013, President Putin and Prime Minister Abe met 19 times, including 3 meetings this year alone. The most recent one was held 3 weeks ago on the sidelines of the annual Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok. The cooperation agenda keeps growing in the areas of energy, oil and gas, automobile industry, agriculture, healthcare, city and seaports infrastructure development, high technologies, and innovations. The most important task today is to create mutual trust and favorable conditions for the settlement of the long-standing sensitive issues between the 2 countries, which include signing of a peace treaty and the Southern Kuril Islands dispute. We are now actively elaborating the plan to conduct joint economic activities on the islands. And Russia is pleased to see the willingness of the government of Japan to find common ground and is ready to work with Tokyo to reach a reliable solution where neither of the parties would feel defeated. Our position on the peace treaty has not changed. We believe that Japan should recognize the outcome, the results of the Second World War. This is the starting point of any serious discussion on this issue. The sovereignty and jurisdiction of the Russian Federation over the Southern Kuril Islands is beyond doubt. Progress can be achieved if Russia and Japan manage to build trust-based relations and advance to a qualitatively new level of mutually beneficial cooperation, especially in practical areas. And we do not set any time limits. In this context, I wish to remind that our talks with China on border issues took 40 years, and those of the elder generation may remember that there were very tense times and blood was spilled on the Amur River in 1969. Ussuri Amur, and it was difficult at the time to imagine that Russia and China will be strategic partners. But we were patient and consistent, and today we have what we have. The same principles of mutual trust and cooperation should lie underneath our efforts to bring to an end the abnormal situation in Russia-Japan relations, lasting for more than 70 years. And you may know that there is still no peace treaty, and our relations are only based on the declaration adopted in 1956 and ratified by the parliaments of the 2 countries. This year is marked by the 70th anniversary of our diplomatic relations with India. And today, the Russia-India partnership has a strategic and privileged nature. Last June, Prime Minister Modi attended and addressed the 21st St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, one of the major dialogue venues to discuss the key global economy and finance issues and challenges. Russia and India closely cooperate in the UN and other multilateral formats, including BRICS and the G20, work together to promote security and stability in the Indian and Pacific Oceans regions. Russia welcomes India's accession to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which was formalized last June at the SCO summit in Astana. I won't go deep into the details of our comprehensive practical cooperation in the areas of defense, trade, industry, agriculture, and others. We share the same views with New Delhi on the situation in Afghanistan. The NATO forces left the country in ruins, not resolving a single issue in the decade they were there. On the contrary, the terrorist and drug threats have substantially grown in Afghanistan. ISIS has settled there while local drug production increased more than tenfold. The Afghan drug trafficking routes have expanded to Africa and Europe. The US and NATO unwillingness or inability, despite many years of presence in Afghanistan, to provide effective assistance to the Afghan government in curbing drug production, which is a key source of terrorism financing, causes embarrassment. The recent US decision to send more troops to Afghanistan is an issue of concern. Washington seems to have no strategy to deal with the basic problems in Afghanistan. The United States has changed its Afghan policy many times over the past few years, increasing, cutting, and redeploying troops. It is completely unacceptable given the fact that the US-led coalition has not yet reported even once to the UN Security Council on the achievements in Afghanistan under the mandate issued many years ago. The allegations of the US media that Russia is arming Taliban are absolutely groundless. And we urge to stop the pointless efforts to create evidence to back up these insinuations. Russia does not support the Taliban, but we are working to implement a relevant resolution of the UN Security Council, providing for the Taliban's inclusion in the political process if it recognizes the current constitution of Afghanistan, renounces violence, and stops cooperating with terrorists. I'm very pleased to note that Pakistan has become our close and important partner in South Asia. We have the same approach to the challenges we face, including terrorism, drug trafficking, and nuclear proliferation. There are institutional frameworks and mechanisms in place to ensure full value strategic dialogue on priority international issues. But I want to emphasize that our relations with Islamabad will never have any designs against India. Russia supports the normalization of relations between India and Pakistan and an early and peaceful resolution of all contentious issues, including transborder terrorism and Kashmir. However, we are not going to interfere in any bilateral dispute unless we get a specific consensus-based request or invitation. We acknowledge the existing legal architecture, which includes the 1972 Shimla Agreement and the 1999 Lahore Declaration, urging the two parties to resolve their issues bilaterally. We hope that both New Delhi and Islamabad will show restraint and continue to improve their relations through dialogue. This year, Pakistan, along with India, joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a full-fledged member, and this step will dramatically increase the capacity and effectiveness of this organization to tackle the growing regional challenges and threats. With India and Pakistan on board, prospects for deeper integration within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization will obviously expand. Beyond that, there is a feeling that the SCO will help to narrow down the differences between the two countries through cooperation. Our nuclear cooperation with international partners, including those in Asia, is based on Russia's unfailing commitment to safe, secure, and peaceful use of atomic energy. Unfortunately, North Korea is moving in the opposite direction. The nuclear tests conducted by Pyongyang are of the utmost concern as they run counter to the norms and principles of the international law, pose a serious threat to peace and security on the Korean Peninsula and in the Asia-Pacific region. It's a very important issue for Russia, which is part of the Northeast Asia. And we resolutely condemn these nuclear tests as well as launches of ballistic missile by Pyongyang. We urge DPRK to end its dangerous and reckless misadventures and implement the relevant UN Security Council resolutions. However, the build-up of military hysteria is the dead end. All the UN Security Council resolutions must be implemented, but all of them, along with sanctions, contain provisions on the need to resume talks to find political solution. There is no alternative to the political and diplomatic methods of addressing the nuclear problem of the Korean Peninsula, based on dialogue among all interested parties. And we call on the responsible members of the international community to support the Russia-China roadmap on double freezing of missile and nuclear activities by the DPRK and large-scale joint exercises by the United States and the Republic of Korea, along with parallel advancement towards the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We are not happy with attempts to provoke and isolate North Korea. Russia is particularly concerned with the efforts of some countries to use an uneasy situation on the Korean Peninsula to boost their military presence in Northeast Asia, deploy new and clearly excessive types of weapons in the region. The U.S. decision to locate THAAD in South Korea may lead to further escalation of regional tensions, erection of additional hurdles for the settlement of the whole range of problems on the Korean Peninsula. Such deployments go beyond the task of deterring the North Korean threat. It only may cause the disruption of the established strategic balances in the Asia-Pacific and will negatively affect the fulfillment of commitments in the framework of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Today, the world is watching with alarm as the US imposes a new set of sanctions against Iran, which threaten the implementation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action concluded in 2015 to resolve the situation around Tehran nuclear program. Unilateral sanctions are unacceptable in principle and irresponsible if they are used to change a well-calibrated balance in one's favor. We continue to closely monitor the recent developments in Myanmar's Rakhine State, urging to put an end to violence, reduce tensions, restore law and order, guarantee protection of civilians, re-establish normal socio-economic conditions, and resolve the refugee problem. Russia welcomes the measures taken by the Myanmar government to implement the recommendations of the Advisory Commission on Rakhine, headed by former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, and supports the efforts to develop interreligious dialogue with the participation of the spiritual leaders of all religions in Myanmar. An attempt to interfere in the internal affairs of a sovereign state may only further exacerbate religious strife. I just want to add that our Minister Lavrov worked on this issue with many stakeholders in New York last week, and there was a very productive meeting with Bangladesh Foreign Minister on the sidelines of the GN, on the sidelines of the General Assembly. And finally, as we all are working on Singapore soil, I wish to add a few words about Russia-Singapore relations. I'm delighted to see that our ties are gaining strength and depth. The comprehensive and forward-looking agenda set up in the course of the Prime Minister Lee Hsien-loon's visit to Moscow in May 2016 is effectively implemented and brings good results. The Russian high-level delegations are frequent visitors to Singapore. In the last 1.5 years, Singapore hosted the Chairperson of the Council of Federation, the upper house of Russian Parliament, Secretary of Russian Security Council, First Deputy Prime Minister, Vice Prime Minister and Presidential Envoy to the Far East. 2 weeks ago, our Minister of Interior took part in the 37th ASEAN-Nepal conference here. 2 important visitors are coming next week, Russian Minister of Transport and the President of Tatarstan, Rustam Minikhanov. This is not to mention that in the middle of October, our Intergovernmental Commission, led by Deputy Prime Minister Shuvalov and DPM Tarman from Singapore, will meet in Moscow. Our bilateral trade, influenced by the world economy fluctuations, shows the potential for recovery, standing at around $3.3 billion last year. It was over 8 billion 3 years ago, but after the oil prices plummeted, of course, it contracted. But we have potential to achieve much more than today. And quite a few economic projects is carried out both in Singapore and in different parts of Russia. I just mentioned such companies as Olam International, Food Empire, Changi Airports International, Keppel Offshore and Marine, and others, which have a strong foothold in the Russian market, pouring capital into agriculture, urban development, airport management, high technologies, shipbuilding, and education. And in its turn, Singapore, as a large financial, business, and logistic hub, houses the offices of hundreds of Russian companies, including Gazprom, Lukoil, Bank VTB Capital, Sportmaster, Acronis, Kaspersky Lab, and many others. Mapped just 1 degree north from the equator, Singapore, nevertheless, is rapidly coming forward as one of our promising partners in the development of Russian Arctic region, given the vast experience of the city-state in urban planning, transportation, seaport infrastructure building, and management. Russia-Singapore relations are, of course, a lot more than just trade and business, and we actively participate in the Shangri-La dialogue. Our Deputy Defense Minister, Alexander Fomin, attended the recent session of this dialogue. At the same time, Russian guided missile cruiser Variag took part in the inaugural International Maritime Review and the 11th Maritime Defense Exhibition, IMDEX Asia, last May. The cultural cooperation between our two countries is growing, and of course we have a very good environment in our bilateral relations. Next year we will celebrate the Golden Jubilee, the 50th anniversary of Russia-Singapore diplomatic relations, and both sides consider it as an important milestone to continue our close cooperation and to reach to new heights. So this is, in short, what I wanted to say about our policy in the Asia-Pacific and Russia-Singapore bilateral.
Thank you, Andrey. That was an extremely comprehensive account of Russia's relations, evolving relations with Asia, not just Asia. You probably, I mean, in the guise of dealing with Asia, you touched upon all the Russian positions on the key issues of our contemporary times. You have some written notes, and could I request that perhaps you might want to sort of rehash it somewhat after our discussions, and after you've done that, if you could send it to us, we'd be very pleased to publish it as a part of an ISAS publication. Now, I'll open the floor for discussions. I might just want to have a rough idea of how many hands will go up at different points in time, but I see and recognize Anish Mishra, but you will, yes, you will identify yourself formally for the sake of our records when, okay, let's begin with Anish and then Madame.
Yes, hello, my name is Anish Mishra. Firstly, I'll say, firstly, I'll say, Your Excellency, was a fantastic presentation. I think you covered the theme very well. You covered extensively on Russia's relations all over Asia, and I was very thrilled with your presentation. Okay, my questions is with Russia's position on two areas, Afghanistan and North Korea. Let me start with Afghanistan. Firstly, what do you make out of the visit of U.S. Defense Secretary Mattis? And in particular, I know you did mention it in your speech, but can you elaborate a little bit more on what does Russia actually wants to see in Afghanistan, mainly the U.S. position, and I just want to know more on what Russia thinks about what's going on in Afghanistan. And the second is on North Korea. You see, I heard Donald Trump's speech in the UN General Assembly, and I was very shocked because you have the leader of the United States threatening to destroy a sovereign country in the United Nations General Assembly. I mean, this is actually very much against, the principle of sovereignty, where you respect each other as equal states. And what does Russia think about this? That the United States has the audacity to stand in UNGA and threaten to destroy a sovereign state. And okay, North Korea themselves said that, our rockets will visit your mainland, that kind of thing. And I think your president put it very well and said that it's a fight between kindergarten kids. So
not president, foreign minister.
Foreign minister. Yes. Sorry, I'm sorry about that. Yeah. So I just want to know your opinion on all this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Might react as others mull over what to ask. Okay.
My name is Alexandra de Mello.
Okay.
I also have a question about North Korea. How can Russia help the Korean Peninsula diffuse? How can you help diffuse the tension in the Korean Peninsula?
Okay, what constructive steps can you take to diffuse tensions? Okay, Andrey, you react to these, and then we will wait for
Yes, as I've mentioned, I start from the end, from the North Korea. We are very much concerned with recent developments in the Korean Peninsula and around. And it is very important because, as I mentioned, we are part of this sub-region, and Vladivostok is just several hundred kilometers from Pyongyang, unlike Guam or the continental United States. And in this regard, I want to remind that after the first launches, unsuccessful, of North Korean ballistic missiles, it was the Russian territory where the debris fell down, not Japan or Guam. Yes. So from the very beginning, we were very much concerned, and this issue was discussed last August in Manila on the sidelines of the ARF ministerial session when Minister Lavrov met with his North Korean counterpart. Of course, we condemn what is being done by Pyongyang, but we clearly understand that this spiral of tension cannot develop endlessly. And you may remember that President Putin said that the North Koreans will eat grass but not renounce their nuclear program. And of course, we should do our best to stop this spiral on confrontations. On the principles that both sides have to show restraint. But it is understandable that this tit-for-tat actions of Pyongyang, namely Kim Jong-un and President Trump, will lead to nowhere. Hence, we put forward this initiative, this Russia-China roadmap.
Double freeze.
Double freeze, double freeze. So to stop this confrontation and to start negotiations, to start dialogue. It is worth to remind that after the six-party talks ended without any results, or they just were stopped, not ended, the contacts between the North Koreans and the Americans continued on the venue of United Nations. There was a dialogue. At least it was a venue where both sides could speak to each other and convey concerns of each other. It is very unfortunate that this dialogue has also stopped without achieving any result. So we firmly believe that, of course, all members of the United Nations should implement the sanctions approved by the Security Council. But the full scale of these resolutions should be implemented, including the clause about movement to political solution, which is frankly overlooked now. The emphasis is on sanctions, but not on political solutions. So we have to urge both the United States and the Northern Korea to stop their hostilities on both sides and to think about moving to a dialogue, because it is all very dangerous. It is, of course, not like two kids fighting each other at a kindergarten, much more serious. And it is, well, it can lead to a world catastrophe, because we understand that any miscalculation which is possible will, I won't say about any kind of third world war, but the aftermaths of any nuclear explosion can be tragic, with huge casualties from many countries. And of course, these statements by the US president that the North Korea will be totally destroyed, as well as the statements by the North Koreans that a visit of North Korean rockets is imminent now, they make no good. So I think we all have to think very seriously and to urge these two parties to the table of negotiations.
Okay. There was also a question on Afghanistan, but can we do this? I mean, can we finish the discussion on North Korea to the extent possible and then focus on Afghanistan? Is your point on North Korea? Okay. Related to Korea. Prospects of war.
It's sort of a related question. My name is Andrey from ISAS. President Putin's rhetoric, especially prior to Trump becoming president, was an increasing agitation towards the policies of the US, particularly in the neighboring regions of Russia, this old Soviet bloc, and the building of missile systems and perceived encroachment of, I don't want to say sovereignty, but so he did make increasing comments about the prospects of confrontation and possibly leading to a distant future of a war. And now with everything that's going on with Korea, I'm wondering what's the status with that? Since Trump came on board, has there been a bit of a retraction of the US policy towards Russia's neighboring region? And has Russia kind of toned down its agitation towards it? It's a difficult question, I know.
Yes, yes, it's a difficult question.
Is it a difficult question or difficulty put?
Yes.
I mean, both.
Well, I understand, and this question is, I think, more about the Russia-US relations in general than, but the North Korea is the North Korean issue is one of the issues where we maintain contacts with the United States, and if I am correct, some time ago the US Special Envoy on Korea visited Moscow and held consultations with our Deputy Foreign Minister. So we are working with the United States on the expert level to pass our estimates of the situation and to convey our vision of possible ways out of this confrontation spiral. But you know that, as I understand, there is no clear vision, clear concept in Washington about what to do, and different people say different things. And in this regard, I wish to mention that what has been said by the Secretary of State is very similar to what Russia and China mean, putting forward this double freezing idea.
Yeah. Of course, one problem with regard to the Korean question, which is probably the principal question that we confront today, not just regionally but globally, is probably the fact that an apprehension on the part of the Korean leadership or North Korean leadership that if they were to stop development of the capabilities without reaching the ultimate fruition of the capabilities, in other words, without having the capacity to visit the United States, the problem will be they've seen what has happened to Iraq and what's happened to Libya. And at this point in time, mathematically almost, you see, the problem about these strategies is that you have to think coolly, dispassionately, mathematically, and logically. So the kind of talks that we are talking about, some say, not necessarily my view, some say that these can only happen when there is a true state of deterrence between the two conflicting or adversarial parties. When that state is reached, perhaps the time would be ripe for some kind of a discussion in whatever form. I mean, it is quite possible at this point in time for the United Nations to become active in this as well. But till such a time as that state is reached, it is a highly unstable situation, and that is one great apprehension that we have. So double freeze to some analysts will do for now, but ultimately this cannot be resolved till both sides perceive that the other party is no longer a threat. And to the mind of any serious analyst, that can only happen when both sides have the capability of visiting each other with unacceptable levels of damage. So this is a very serious situation. At the same time, we have seen this in South Asia itself. We have seen this between Pakistan and India. When that point was reached in 1998, we were able to evade at low levels of confrontation. So perhaps, I mean, obviously there is hope, but how leaderships approach this very complex situation till it reaches the point where there will be no option but to talk. Remember that there has been no peace treaty in Korea. It's still in there has been only an armistice. And the Koreans also have a recollection of the entire peninsula being very nearly destroyed between 1950 and 1953 during the Korean War. So, I mean, once bitten, twice shy. This time the Koreans would probably be very careful about allowing the others a capability of destroying them once again without a retaliation. Anyway, so if there be no more questions on Korea, shall we then discuss Afghanistan? You had a question. Has it been answered?
No, we haven't spoken about
Okay.
Yeah.
What was your question on Afghanistan?
Okay. Is that your opinion on the recent visit by the US Defense Secretary Mattis, and also the larger Afghanistan issue? I want you to elaborate more on what does Russia want to see in Afghanistan?
Okay.
I just want to add one point on Korea.
Korea, okay.
Yes, just to conclude this theme. We have to look in the future, to look beyond the present situation. You may remember that in September 2005, when there was an agreed declaration between the participants of six-party talks, and actually the process of the nuclearization of the Korean Peninsula began. It was stopped later, but it began, and the North Koreans even destroyed some infrastructure. Yes. Yeah. At the same time, it was agreed that we have I mean the stakeholders, have to create sort of mechanism on security in the Northeast Asia. And Russia was appointed as a coordinator of these talks. And we assigned one of our ambassadors at large to cover this issue. And there were certain meetings, but they also ended. I think we have to revive these attempts to create a mechanism which will enable us to maintain peace and security in the Northeast Asia, and maybe to elaborate a mechanism of dispute resolution with regard to the situation in this part of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a mechanism for dispute resolution. I've spent many, many years in the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva, which is the only multilateral body in the world dealing with multilateral disarmament negotiations. There is a very simple point that is often made. If some have nuclear weapons, others will want it also. You see? So you can't just get out of that realism, political realism. If Israel has nuclear weapons, Iran will at some point want it also. It's a question of negotiations, how you can negotiate your way into a situation where you possess the nuclear capability. With a lot of effort, we got the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty going, which was to complement the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The United States, of course, also did not join the treaty. And North Korea came out of it. There was all kinds of different signalings. I mean, they took advantage of some legal loopholes and came out of it. They came out of it because they felt threatened. Till such time as we can set up a mechanism whereby that mechanism can ensure security for all nations, all states, then we will have that unstable system. And if that instability breaks down, there is tremendous danger, you see, because any of these weapons can destroy a city. We've held it, through the Cold War it was possible, through all kinds of bilateral arrangements between the US and the Soviet Union then. But now that we have a multipolarity in nuclear capabilities, we need another kind of mechanism. But what had happened in 2003 in Iraq was a very would have very serious repercussions for global international relations. And some of us had foreseen that at that point in time. And we are seeing the consequences of it today. Anyway, so any more points on Afghanistan or anything else now? Let's open it to all. Yeah.
So we are moving west now.
Yeah.
We are moving to Afghanistan. Yes.
Okay.
It's, of course, it's a very complex issue, understandably, and it's a very sensitive issue for my country, which was deeply involved in Afghanistan affairs. We all remember that Russia sent troops in 1978 with little or no result, and we had to withdraw in 1989, if I am correct. It was completely withdrawn. This is a very sensitive issue because, unlike for the United States, Afghanistan is in the soft underbelly of Russia. It is very close. It was very close to the Soviet Union. We had a direct border. Now it is still very close. And we have to exert huge efforts to curb the flow of drugs from Afghanistan to Europe through the territory of Central Asian republics and Russia. For a very long time, we tried to work with the United States and other members of these international security forces in Afghanistan to stop the opium cultivation in Afghanistan. But we did not see any serious feedback from our efforts. And actually, the international security forces, they put just a blind eye on this problem, which is very serious. But we have been trying to find a solution to help the Afghan people, because it is a friendly state. We established relations in 1920 or so with Afghanistan. I mean, after the Soviet Union was created, but even during the Russian Empire, we had relations, very close relations. Both.
That was the great game.
Yes, yes, yes. So we understand that there is no military solution of the Afghan problem. We have to bring all parties to the negotiation table and to urge them to find a compromise, so to create a normal coalition government. You know that the previous Afghan government put forward these principles on which Taliban can join the political process. I have mentioned them in my statement. We maintain contacts with both parties, and in recent times we have discussed the Afghan situation in Moscow with the Afghan parties, with participation of Shanghai cooperation organizations, and we invited the US envoy to take part in these talks. So, however long it will take, we have to continue to find peaceful solutions. And sending more troops, I don't think it will bring any positive outcome. It will only result in more casualties of innocent people and more damage to the weak Afghan economy. Well, I cannot make any substantial comments on the visit of Secretary of Defense to Kabul. They have their troops, and it is normal that Secretary of Defense come to visit the troops, to look at the situation on the ground, given the recent decision by President Trump to send more troops. But it leads to a dead end. We have to look for peaceful solution, to force the involved parties of Afghanistan to find a compromise. The only alternative is war. More blood, more victims, more damage to Afghanistan, more tensions and instability in the Middle East, in the West Asia.
Yeah. I mean, incredibly, I mean, what happened in Matis during the visit to the airport, by the way, it was supposed to be a secret, the visit. Nobody knew that he was going to Kabul. And within 2 hours, there were 45 rockets fired at the airport, you see. So you can imagine how extremely difficult the situation is, the kind of leakages that happen, and raising troop levels 3,500. I don't know what to do, because when it was 100,000,
Yes,
it made no
yes,
difference. So
yes.
13,500
Yes.
is for the Taliban's chicken feed. Okay, Mr. Chaturvedi.
Thank you, Dr. Chowdhury. Ambassador, you referred to Afghanistan as Russia's soft underbelly, and Dr. Chowdhury mentioned about the great game. There was a lot of geopolitics, there is geopolitics, and that is perhaps one reason Russia is getting more interested in Pakistan. That was the case. US was more interested and played its role. Now US is struggling in Afghanistan and Russia is entering there. In your remarks, you talked about two important, very critical issues in Afghanistan, which is very challenging: terrorism and drugs and trafficking. And many reports suggest that those challenges, many of them are emanating from Pakistan. Pakistan not only created several terrorist organizations, but also nurturing those. Now you are strengthening military relations with Pakistan because military officials visited there. What is Russia's position? Because now Pakistan and India both have become part of SCO. So do you see it's more getting complicated, or do you see any solution coming up on those fronts? Thank you.
You know, I think, first of all, I think it is unfair to blame Pakistan for nurturing terrorist organizations. It is much more complex issue, and we all know the history of how Al-Qaeda and then Daesh were born, and why, and who sent troops to Iraq, and who supports whom in Syria now. So it is not fair to blame Pakistan more than other serious stakeholders, so to say. We have very good and very constructive relations with Pakistan for decades. And our military cooperation with Pakistan is not aimed against any third country, be it India or Bangladesh or anyone else. Military and technical cooperation between sovereign states is quite normal nowadays, and I don't think this is an issue. What I can say that in our view, participation of both India and Pakistan in Shanghai Cooperation Organization will be beneficial for all parties involved. And we hope that it will lead maybe to better understanding, better collaboration between India and Pakistan too, as well as all participants. You know that Iran is also very keen on joining the SCO, and it is becoming more and more popular organization, not only in terms of economy and trade, but in terms of anti-terrorist combat. So this is my point of view.
Yeah. Well, drugs, I mean, I don't know if Shashi Tharoor mentions it in his book, but one of the great results of the British presence in India was the encouragement of opium production in India in the 19th, 20th century, 19th century in particular. and then their export of the opium to China, which of course, as everyone knows, led to the Opium War. So let it not be forgotten how opium came, or drugs came to this part of the world. Long before the problems took this acute form in Afghanistan, elsewhere. I mean, I myself was a young civil servant and a magistrate in the frontier province, and one of the problems in the courts that we handled was opium charas cases of drugs. So this dates back long before the present turmoil. And the idea that, you see, it's very difficult to introduce, sad that such an idea was introduced to nomadic peoples, because nomadic peoples move from place to place, they don't have money, so if they take a bit of drugs and move from one place to another, the drugs work as money. And most of the cases that we used to try and sentence people to 1 week, 2 weeks in jail, they were quite happy to go to jail for a bit of drugs and then take those same drugs and come out of the jail and trade them again. So this is part of the consequence of imperial presence of the British in India and the kind of exploitation that they did with using Indian agricultural capabilities to their advantage. Anyway, yes.
Your Excellency, my name is Robin Steinberg. I'm from the University of Liverpool. Could you elaborate more about the cooperation with Singapore and Russia's interest in cybersecurity? Because there's been a lot of development on cybersecurity issues and also in Asia as well. Because I've seen Arcadis has been working very closely with India as well, and South Asia. They've just signed some form of cooperation in development, cybersecurity, and cooperation with Interpol. Could you tell us more about it?
Thank you. Cybersecurity, I think, is a very, very promising prospective area of cooperation between Russia and Singapore, given our expertise in this field and the efforts of the Singapore government to enhance the Singapore capabilities in this sphere. There is a mutual understanding that such cooperation could be very useful, and there are certain plans. We have a draft of MOU between Ministry of Home Affairs of Singapore and Ministry of the Interior of Russia, which includes possible cooperation in terms of cybersecurity. We have our experts from the Kaspersky Lab working at the Global Center for Innovation, Interpol. We have several Russian companies producing software to combat the cyber attacks in Singapore. But of course, frankly speaking, as ambassador, I'm not satisfied with what we have now. I try to achieve more from the Russian side, because declarations of interests are important, but more practical steps in this direction are needed. So today, we mainly work with Singaporeans within this Interpol Center for Global Center for Innovations, not on a bilateral basis. But I hope we will advance along this track. Yes.
No, I think we'll have to bring this to. Are you raising your hand to be able to ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give it the floor, but very quickly,
Yeah.
because 4:30 I have to close it.
Sure. Just a short question. My name is Rahul. I just wanted to know what kind of trade do you foresee, between Russia and Southeast Asia and in general, and in what sectors do you foresee, let's exclude oil and military for this. But other than that, what sectors do you think will be driving the trade, import, export from both sides between Russia and Southeast Asia, including maybe also Japan if it is there. But what sectors?
Well,
And
thank you.
what sort of numbers do you foresee?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think it is not correct to speak about our trade with Southeast Asia, because all members of ASEAN have different economies. And we understand that whereas we import, say, electronics from Singapore, more we at the same time, because Singapore has no agriculture, for example, in fact, but we import a lot of agriculture products from Vietnam, from Thailand, from Laos and Cambodia, for example, So far, our trade is not a very high level. It is about 22 billion US dollars with all ASEAN countries altogether. But it was just 7 billion 10 years ago. So it is increasing. It is increasing. And of course, we export not only oil, gas, and weapons. We also export machinery. We export our cars and trucks, and we have assembling capacities in Vietnam and in Cambodia, for example. And we supply some, of course, fertilizers and metals. And we import, textiles from Vietnam and from Indonesia. So we want to diversify the trade, of course, and we see potential. On the one hand, we want to increase the share of machinery or processed goods from Russia. On the other hand, we understand that given the structure of ASEAN countries' economy, agriculture, seafood, and textiles will remain very important items that we will continue to import.
Do you have a question to ask?
Yes.
Yeah, quick one.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question because it's a real privilege to hear from you. Okay, it's on South Asia. We see South Asia, there's been some very serious changes. Look, the Afghanistan was created to be a buffer state between the British Raj and the Russian Empire. Today, things have changed a lot. You see, if you had successfully conquered Afghanistan, I'm sure Russia would have somehow tried to destabilize Balochistan and get Gwadar port, because Russia has a need for warm water port. But today, Pakistan has given you access to Gwadar port. They said, no, welcome to Pakistan. You have Gwadar port. At the same time, Russia has had operation in Gilgit-Baltistan, which the Indians would call POK, Pakistan Occupied Kashmir. So the things that, you say that, you want to be neutral with India and Pakistan, this and that. But what I foresee is that in the next maybe 2 to 3 years, Russia is going to be torn up between your relations between India and China and Pakistan. Just to remember, India is your #1 customer for arms, and Donald Trump is competing to get the business of this customer from you. So how are you going to manage your relations between India and China-Pakistan? So just add one last point, since this is the conclusion, is that relations between China and Pakistan is in the interest of the foreign policy of Russia, because Russia aims to keep the newly independent Central Asia republics within its sphere of influence. I'm sure you're aware of the Economic Cooperation Organization, and that's why if you have good relations with China and Pakistan, it will help you to keep your Central Asian republics within your sphere of influence. So just on your reaction on this.
I mean, you must always hear, not only read an ambassador between the lines, but hear the ambassador between the lines. And you've done it well. I think continue.
Yes.
Yeah, you might react.
You know, first I want to clarify that we were not going to conquer Afghanistan. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And our interference, which began in 1978, was in a very special geopolitical environment at the time, and the steps from the United States. There was a threat.
He can't speak for Peter the Great.
Yeah, yes, no. I didn't live at the time, yes. Yes. Then, speaking about our relations with South Asia and with China, our policy from the very beginning was aimed at creating peaceful cooperation, aimed at maintenance of peace and stability in this part of the world. We never played cards with someone against someone. And I mentioned that we have very close cooperation with Pakistan, not only in military field. In Soviet times, we built some machinery plants and power plants, steel, yes, as well as in India, as well as in China. And we are not going to resolve the issues between China and India or between India and Pakistan, but we want to create peaceful and constructive environment which will enable these countries to find a common denominator, to find common grounds. We are not going to impose our influence here. Of course, all countries have their own national interests. We just want to find and to create environment for cooperation of, well, China, India, Pakistan, Iran, Central Asia. Hence, the SCO was established, you know. It all began from the so-called Shanghai Five Countries, and from the disengagement of troops on the border between China and then Soviet Union. But today it is an organization where all participants can realize their interest on the basis of mutual respect and mutual respect of interests of each other. It is a very complex issue. It is not easy just to answer your questions within 5 minutes, because there is certain history and it will take a long time to discuss. Maybe sometimes we have more time, but not today. Thank you. And,
yeah, sure. I mean, when Anis was asking the questions, he was also injecting some of his own ideas.
Yeah.
I mean,
yes, I understand.
In other words, yes, and he, I mean, that will evolve someday into some kind of a thesis that you might want to write on the subject. Thank you very much, Andrey. It was an extremely stimulating discussion for all around. Let's give you a big hand. And as a token of our appreciation, something for you to take away and read, something that I had scribbled.
Thank you.
in my
Thank you
spare
very
time.
much, Iftekhar. And thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
all,
Thank you.
for your attention, for your time, and for your very good and very interesting questions.
Okay, might I invite you to a small tea reception outside? And Andrey, this is my card. Yeah, it was extremely